Just a second. I may have. Would you like me to advertise to my followers on Twitter?
That would be nice. Yeah. Let's see. I'm not sure if it has started on YouTube yet. I'm very new at the whole live streaming thing.
I have about 100 followers on YouTube, but on Twitter I have 1,500.
Yeah. Oh, we're live. We've probably been live for a couple seconds. So, okay, I'll start then by saying, okay, YouTube, welcome to my first ever live stream. It's going to be interesting. I have with me the Effeminate Degenerate from Canada. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, hello. I am the Effeminate Degenerate. I am a feminist, socialist, Gen Z, pretty much everything that the internet hates right now. But I want to show the internet that maybe give these ideas a second chance. They're not so bad, although you do have some elements that are.
And we'll get into that in due time. So let's just start with a little bit of backstory. I know you told your more or less elaborated backstory on another stream the other day. So just to start, what made you sort of get into feminism?
What made me a feminist? So I actually used to be quite rabidly anti-feminist. I used to watch YouTubers like Sargon of Akkad. I used to be quite big into their fan base. However, as I grew up, and when I turned, like, I think when the year started to move into 2017, I began to notice that Sargon was apologizing more and more for Trump. And like, I was never really a fan of Donald Trump. I never saw any value in his brand of lies and deceit, while just maintaining the same systems that were already existing in America. And I started to notice that he was starting to act as an apologist for Trump and just trying to provide like excuses for the bad things that he was doing in America. So, and I also noticed that Sargon was getting more and more and more emotional. Like, he was getting more and more ranty. Like, he didn't have any, he stopped having arguments. He stopped referencing the facts. He just kind of screamed at the camera. And so I lost a lot of respect for him. And I started, looking at his, the people on YouTube, the left-wing YouTubers who were providing responses to what Sargon was doing. And I looked at these responses. I'm like, wow, they seem to have a lot of facts behind their side. I've been told all my life, facts over feels. It's the right that has the facts, and the left that's just these emotional snowflakes that crumble at the slightest sign of resistance. But it started to seem like it was becoming the other way around. So that's what got me into feminism, and got me into that sort of activism. And although like my brand of feminism is more concentrating on less like kind of minor cultural issues, like say sexism in video games or like mansplaining, I don't really concern myself with that at all. My brand of feminism is more concerned with, the amount of labor that women do, the rewards for that labor, sexism in the workplace, sexual violence against women and men, double standards, gender roles, and especially working towards helping our sisters in the third world with the struggles they're facing in their countries and putting a spotlight on their voices and on their issues.
Yeah, okay. So going into Sargon, I think he's an interesting character because even to this day, if he takes a political test, he ends up being like marginally on the left. And I do think that he is somewhat, like, I don't think he's lying to people when he says that he is on the left, but he sees a lot of problems with it. However, I do agree with you that he has, well, now he openly says that he is a Trump supporter and he hopes for Trump 2020 and build a wall and all that shit. Whereas I think his argumentation about why he supports Trump is rather weak, because he only supports Trump because Trump triggers the left. And being a political commentator, I don't think that is a good enough reason to support a political candidate.
Not at all. I think it actually reveals quite a childish mentality, because you're just doing what angers your opponents. And like, like in general, if you're a mature person, you should be able to like ignore your opponents, and if you or like criticize them, analyze their ideas, and then build a solid base of your own. You don't have to shift your base just because it provides you with amusement.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. He's an interesting character, but I still do enjoy some of his stuff. I've stopped watching his This Week in Stupid videos because it's the same video over and over again. And I made a video about how some YouTubers are becoming quite stale, and Sargon was my prime example of that. Okay, so moving into socialism, I didn't manage. I didn't get around to see the entire stream you did with 40 last week.
yeah.
But you were discussing mainly if Hitler was a socialist or not, and I was basically on your side of the debate. I like 40 a lot. He's a good friend, but I think it's God damn it, bugs. Uh, I think it's um, disingenuous, or at least misinformed at best, to say that Hitler was a socialist, because in my view he didn't follow the socialist or the rules of what socialism is.
Yeah. He didn't.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, just go on.
So like Hitler was in bed with big business and private interests. He took power away from the workers by removing their rights to strike, to form unions. Hitler privatized tons of different industries all across Germany. Like, these are not things socialists would do. You know,
Yeah.
socialism is not necessarily about state control, but the idea behind socialism is an economy that works for the people, an economy that is in the hands of the working class, whether that be through some socialists advocate a workers' state. Other socialists, like myself, believe that it's best when the businesses in society are directly in the hands of the working class themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so just tell me, why do you not consider yourself a communist?
My problem with communism is that it's a bit too like far down the road. Like, it has goals, but these goals seem so like abstract and philosophical to most people that it's hard to have a conversation and convince people to move to communism. And the long protracted movement from socialism to communism is something. It's not really something you can sell to people, as well as, you know, here's some tangible things we can do right now to improve your lives. And that's how I see socialism. You know, it because it's the next step. It's much more easy to convince people to move in that direction, as opposed to like communism, where you have to convince people to not only just have a transition of power from one class to another, but also a transition away from money, a transition away from the state. You know, it becomes a bit like it starts to become a whole bunch more. And I often find that a lot of the communists I talk to get really bogged down in extremely complicated theory.
Okay, in what way?
Well, they tend to be quite obsessed with having you read every single 19th century philosopher. And I'm a big reader. I love reading. My favorites, you know, I like reading Noam Chomsky. I like reading Marx. I like reading Hannah Arendt. There's all sorts of different theorists that I love looking at. And I'm also trying to get into more reading, more right-wing stuff, so I can, you know, maybe see if they have something else to say again, and see if, you know, if not, how can I convince people who do believe this, who do have this outlook on the world, to shift their outlook.
Yeah. Okay, so to get into our main sort of discussion point here, socialism sort of versus, or yeah, social democracy, or why you don't think social democracy is good enough. I would like to hear your point of view about social democracy.
Mm. Social democracy. Social democracy is interesting because it's the form of capitalism that is the hardest to criticize for a socialist, because it does, at least, you know, it offers some protection for members of the working class. It does offer benefits. It offers fairer wages. And these are all good, important steps. However, my problem with social democracy is that it is it is vulnerable to the government that is in power at the time. Like in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, most of Europe and America and Canada all had quite a strong social democratic element to their economics, whether the politician was of the left or the right. But during the late 70s and in the 1980s, there was a shift to neoliberalism, a shift to privatization, shift to cutting those benefits, harming the ability of the working class to strike and to organize. And, we've seen the results, sky-high inequality. And my problem is that social democracy is vulnerable to that sort of transition. Whereas socialism, when the power is really in the hands of the working class, it's more difficult to wrench it away. When it's not just a government giving to the working class, but rather the working class through their ownership of, the economy, being able to provide for themselves, it makes it less fragile to a renewal of capitalism.
Yeah. Okay. So I was in a sort of discussion yesterday with one of the other people from the Red Eye Stream. He's more of a conservative type of person, and we had a good discussion about socialism versus capitalism. And I sort of pointed out to him that I don't really see myself as a capitalist, but I don't really use the word socialist about myself either. I'm a little bit in between. I see the social democratic mix as the healthiest way to go about it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because I think that a society, I think that there are some things that the state shouldn't really be having their fingers in, like, for example, culture, art, making video games, making mattresses, making cars. I think that there are some aspects that a more capitalistic model would be better in order to progress as much as possible. Whereas I see socialism as a tool to sort of protect the rights of the people inside of the country.
Oh, I see.
There should be a safety net. If you're poor, you shouldn't have to pay. Like, everyone should pay nothing to get health care. You should do that over the tax dollar or the tax kroner or whatever. Yeah, well, Norwegian. Yeah, like, you should do that through taxes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So why would you oppose capitalistic aspects in that regard?
Well, it's interesting to, I think it's important to make a distinction here between individual ownership, which is not inherently capitalistic in nature, and this broader private ownership where you have a capitalist exploiting a huge number of people. So as opposed to a single individual just selling what they make themselves, as opposed to someone owning a factory and owning the tools that their workers are using. I am against the latter, not the former. The problem I have with capitalism when it comes to, say, let's say the arts, is that there is an ever greater focus to push for what will benefit the people who are owning the institution, rather than necessarily the artistic vision of the people who are working under it. And the people who are working under it do not necessarily have the freedom to set their own agenda of their own labor. They are having it dictated by someone from on high. That's my problem with it. And when I talk about socialism, it's not necessarily always government. I think that government has a role in a socialist society, but what I'm more interested in is people power. I'm interested in worker cooperatives, self-management.
Okay, so, but to me that doesn't necessarily go inherently against every aspect of capitalism either. like because at that point you need to make the distinction between capitalism and corporatism, because those are not necessarily the same thing. Whereas I see corporatism as a sort of distorted ultra how can I phrase it right? It's sort of a distorted version of capitalism, whereas a everything from every earned benefits go into the top maximum 10% of people, which is way which is way closer to what the United States is today, sadly. I know that some of the people watching this stream at the moment might not have a problem with me saying that, but America is is very much a corporatist society. But that's what I mean. That capitalism is just the idea of you being able to strengthen your own economy by your own merits. As our friend Mad Dodge would say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And it was, by the way, quite funny when that comment actually showed up in the last conversation. But so I see, and that's what I mean about capitalism. Whereas in a private sort of sector, capitalism could be good, whereas you use socialism as a tool in the public sector in order to make sure that no one falls behind.
Well, I will definitely agree with you that the brand of capitalism that has emerged in the United States is a deeply ugly creature. But I think it has historical precedent. Like during the Gilded Age, a similar level of income inequality, lobbying by big interest groups, and huge monopolies beginning to dominate the market was observed. I don't think that it's entirely unprecedented that capitalism can degenerate into this more toxic brand of capitalism. However, I will say capitalism is not necessarily how you define it. I define capitalism as simply just private ownership of the economy. In individuals owning the economy rather than groups of individuals, as I would see, as I think that would be a superior way of moving forward would be for groups of different people to own the economy, as opposed to this small class of profiteers and financiers and businessmen who inherited all their wealth.
Yeah, and in that case, again, corporatism morphs into an oligarchy, and I think we can safely say that we don't want that. Okay, so a lot of people, it's actually been someone made a study about where in the world it would be easier to get wealthy.
Yeah.
And it turned out that some of the easiest places in the world would be Scandinavia. It would be easier in Norway to become a millionaire than in the United States, for example.
Yeah.
And that's, we all want to be millionaires in some way, because we all want to not have that economical pressure on us, sort of. So people that usually say that, I wouldn't want to have $1 million, for example. It's like, yeah, but you would like to never have to care about money again.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is good about this social democratic system, is that we even though we are a capitalist country by those standards, we still are able to make the differences between poor and rich as small as possible, and can't really see any socialist country that doesn't go for the democratic or social democratic model doing that as effectively.
Well, if I had to point to two socialist societies that I look up to as good models, I would say the state of Rojava and the Zapistas of southern Mexico. I say these are pretty effective societies. I like that their economy is democratic. I like the emphasis they put on resisting racism and sexism. I think they're really very good examples of socialist societies. I'm much less enthusiastic, of course, about countries like the former Soviet Union. I think that was a bad form of socialism. In a similar way to the corporatism, as you say, is a bad form of capitalism.
Yeah.
And,
So I got a question.
oh, sure.
Let me see. I'm trying to follow our chat as well.
Yes.
And let's see, Madodge, could you please just ask the question in a way that's again so that I can actually ask it? The voice of one asks you, what percentage will the workers get of the company and profits? 15, 25% or more?
I want the workers to own the company, and they get to decide what profits go to their salary and what profits go to investment and what profits go to savings. I believe in economic democracy.
Okay, oh, okay, it was Voice's question. God damn it. Sorry to the chat. I'm horrible at this. Now, just to go a little bit into that, because democracy has proven to be a rather ineffective form of government. Like it is the best we got, and it's sort of the most fair that we got, but it is a rather ineffective way of controlling things.
Mm.
And at that point, I just wonder how you think a sort of, let's say, a factory would be able to actually decide who gets how much without there being major differences from people.
You mean for well, I mean, we could look at the worker collectives in what's a face, the Basque County in Spain, the Mondragon cooperative. The workers there seem to do quite a good job of deciding, okay, our managers get this much, we get this much, and they work from there. And every worker in that, cooperative has a voice. I'd say that the problem with our current system is that it's democracy on too large a scale, and especially in the United States, with too open to corporate interests, too open to bribery. And I definitely think that there would need to be regulations to prevent that sort of thing from affecting a workplace democracy as well.
Okay, so but wouldn't strong unions sort of be a useful way out of that problem?
I see strong unions as eventually I hope to have the unions run the factories themselves as opposed to having to work as a counterbalance to the boss. I think unions are extremely important, and I see in them the immense potential for liberation for the working class.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to ask me about my views in there? Sorry, I'm like I said, this is the first live stream I've ever done, or the first live stream I've ever hosted. So
it's natural to be awkward on your first time. No worries. I'm sure your audience is loving it. You have lovely.
Are they talking about live streams or are they talking about sex? No, yeah, if it's anything you want me to elaborate on.
So you see the Norwegian model as the superior way forward in terms of how to manage an economy.
Yeah, it's not a perfect way. I need to point that out. We definitely have our flaws as well, but whenever there are humans, there will always be flaws.
Yes.
So I think that the Norwegian system is actually yeah, I think it's superior to any other system I've seen or laid my eyes on, at least.
I will definitely say that of the nations of the world, because Rojava and Zapista are kind of loosely organized independent movement. They aren't really nations. Norway is by far the best, in my opinion. I have immense respect for the Norwegian people and what they've done with their economy and their society.
Yeah. So there, I can't remember who said it. I think it might have been Cabbage from the Red Eye Stream that
Yeah.
pointed out that he sees it as Norway can use socialism because we can afford socialism. We have enough oil so that we're doing quite well because of that. And that's an argument I see quite a lot, and I have my rebuttals to that. But what would you say to something like that?
To something like that?
Yeah.
Well, I think you'd have to look at the immense amount of wealth that investing that the profits that Norway has created from that oil will allow them to be able to sustain on. Like, because of the the wisdom of the Norwegian people and their investments in green technologies, once the oil dries up, Norway will have something to fall back on. And not to mention, it's a very beautiful country. So there's always that.
Yeah, we have our tourism. No, and what's interesting about it is that most of the Norwegian economy is not based on our oil. It's based on our tax money.
Mm,
So our oil money is actually a sort of reserve for us to tap into if we absolutely need it. Now we have a rather right-wing government at the moment, and they love to tap into that whenever they feel like it.
mm,
And then they want to, lower our taxes. People get less taxes, and then they get happy, of course.
yeah.
But the problem is that they are lowering the taxes from the top down. So my father, for instance, he actually got a tax increase thanks to the government we
Very
have
cunning.
now.
Yeah, very, very cunning. The
Yeah,
government in the United States actually did it a similar way. They cut people's taxes at the bottom temporarily, but in about 10 years, it would actually translate into a tax increase for most people
yeah,
who aren't wealthy.
yeah. That's a talking point. One of my favorite YouTubers mentions quite often. I don't know if you are following Secular Talk.
I am indeed.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah,
Uh,
I do have a lot of respect for him, especially for what he's doing in terms of America. He's quite left wing for Americans.
yeah. Would you say that he still doesn't go far enough?
Well, I mean, I am a far leftist, of course,
Yeah,
and I'd say that he would be kind of a mainstream European social democrat if he was in Europe, but because he's in the United States, he looks much more left wing.
yeah. To me, and I think he points it out quite often as well that in a more international scale, he's not that far left. He's quite centrist. And but to me, it's refreshing to see someone in the American sphere that sort
Yeah,
of champions at least the changes that I would see necessary in the United States.
no, definitely.
Um, so so going back to that, how would you define um, okay? So how would you define socialism? I know that Madodge wanted to know that.
Yeah, I know I provided the Oxford Dictionary definition, but I don't think that is it's quite vague and it can be translated into multiple ways. But the way I would definitely define my brand of socialism is economic democracy.
Okay, yeah. So and how does that definition necessarily differ from social democracy?
The difference between social democracy and socialism is that it's still in the hands of the state to do the work of the redistribution. And we still see, like what your right wing government is doing, people who are going to chip away at that social democracy. Um, with socialism, that power is out of the politicians' hands and into the people's hands. No one can take away from the workers what they own themselves unless they're going into like fascism.
Okay, so but that sounds very, let's say, revolutionary, in my opinion.
Mm.
Um, is are you sort of striving towards a revolution?
Depends on the situation. I think that there are some countries that could do with a revolution that you would probably agree with. Countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia. You can't make changes in those countries because there isn't a democracy. The elites have shut the door to change, and if you make peaceful resistance impossible, you make violence resistance inevitable. But I would say that I am a woman of peace. I strive to have the transition from from capitalism to socialism be as peaceful as possible. And only if like my country degenerated into some sort of like fascist authoritarianism would I be for like a sort of like 1917 style revolution, storm the parliament, gun down the prime minister, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but that's the deal. Like in some senses, I think most people even are revolutionary, and that's something that I like about Americans, because they are inherently revolutionary in the sense that that's why they want to keep their guns, because they think that, okay, if a tyrannical government shows up, then we have to actually fight back. And I don't disagree with that statement. Now, there are obviously different definitions of what a dictator is, or a tyrannical government. Like some people would maybe see Trump as a tyrannical president, whereas others don't. I wouldn't put him in the sort of tyrannical position at this moment. I think he definitely has elements of him that scare me.
Yeah.
Whereas other things, he just strikes me like a actually pretty intelligent neoconservative that has fooled people to think that he isn't a neocon. Because you can see that he littered his administration with, Goldman Sachs people and other neocons, and the neocons are basically talking to him every time he is going to do something in the Middle East. So, but I'm not sure if he has a guiding philosophy. I think he is just trying to understand the political atmosphere in the United States, and he's trying to shake it up in his way.
I think he's very much a populist. I think he follows what he sees as the general mood and shifts there. Like the general mood in the United States, although it may not seem like it from some like libertarians, is in general favor of some gun control. And Trump actually shifted to a brand of gun control that I would see as like even a bit too far, like where he said we should take the guns without trial.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was interesting when I said that, but I don't know. I think he's doing, like, every time he comes out in the media and says something, I always keep in mind that he might be A/B testing, like, because it always seems like he's trying to say something that people would feel is very much off the wall, and then he just sees how people respond to it, because he backtracked on a lot of the gun control things later. So I think he is smarter than a lot of the left gives him credit for, but I don't agree with the way he does certain things.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say that he's not a blithering idiot who's incapable of anything, obviously. I think he has a certain cunning for the mood at the time and how he is able to shift his positions with the mood. I think he's decently good at building that sort of cult of personality thing, where he gets his followers, sorry, a bit of a Freudian slip there, to be very devoted to him. But I think in some aspects, he I don't think he has, like, I think with some of the right-wing leaders, I don't necessarily think that they're like bad people at heart. I think they believe what they're doing is good. Like George W. Bush was a very bad president, but I think he believed he was doing good. Donald Trump does not strike me as someone who thinks that they're doing the right thing. He strikes me as someone who wants to be liked more than he wants to do good.
Yeah, Well, I would respectfully disagree when it comes to George Bush. I think he was very much aware that he was doing something bad, but that's a different debate, I think.
Yeah.
So going into um, the more feminist side of you,
Yeah.
going back to that for a little second, because MC, I saw that he was joining in, that he was in our commentary field, and we were talking yesterday, and he posed a problem that I would be very interested to hear your answer to.
Okay. Sure.
Because we were talking about the sort of social conservatism and like the oh, what's it called? Sorry, my brain just froze right now. Uh, Black rights. um, yeah, black rights, gay rights. God,
Yes.
I can't understand why I'm forgetting the exact correct word that I'm looking for, but
For all
it's not
these
really
one.
what.
For all these issues in one.
No. Um, but it doesn't matter because that was more about black rights. Um, but we were talking about gay marriage,
I see.
which I would obviously imagine that you are a strong proponent for.
Yes.
I can't imagine you being against that. And for the record, I'm very much for like if you want to marry someone and that other person want to marry you, then go ahead.
Yeah.
Um, doesn't matter what, as long as it's everyone is consenting adults, then it's fine. But he proposed to me that social change need to come due to society gaining something from that change.
Hmm.
And then he asked me the question, what did society gain by allowing gay marriage? In sort of a very um, like for example a materialistic way. What did society actually gain by that legislation? And I was curious to what you might say to that.
Well, it's a very interesting way of looking at the world. I can't say I share it, but working from that framework, I would say that it would be a measure that helped the economy because it would increase the numbers of marriages. So increase the number of luxury goods that these people would spend, increase the number of sales for bridal gowns, or in the case of the lesbians, or, tuxedos in the case of grooms, because now more and more people are permitted to be married.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's an interesting answer, at least. Well, that's a capitalistic answer. Uh, no, yeah, because in my opinion, and the answer I gave MC was that it sort of took away the social pressure of this minority group that sort of wanted nothing more than to be able to marry the person they love.
Yeah.
And that pressure was suddenly removed. Now they could actually do that. And thereby they could actually work as a more productive part of society because they don't walk around feeling that pressure anymore. Um, I'm I obviously didn't have any statistics for that. That was mostly just what I would think that society would gain from it. Um, but in my opinion, what people call a marriage doesn't really matter. All in my opinion, all that matters is that every person should have the same rights to do whatever they want. So I guess that's the libertarian in me. Um, so what would you say? And now we're moving over to sort of the last topic that I have. What would you say that are today's major problems on the left?
The major problems on the left. I would say that the left needs to work on how it talks with its opposition. It needs to be more open to conversation with people who disagree with it. It needs to be less obsessed with niche cultural issues like manspreading or mansplaining. It needs to be more it needs to stop ignoring class. It needs to recognize that class is extremely important in any analysis of society. And if you ignore the suffering that the poorest are feeling, then you're not really providing an exceptional critique of how society is.
Okay, so a common, or at least, yeah, common criticism that the right has for the left nowadays is that the left sort of has allied themselves with Islam. Would you agree with that statement? And would you, in that case, agree that that's a problem?
Depends on what segment of the left you're talking about. I will say that there are some people who have, like, what was its name? Oh, God. Oh, Judith Butler, when she said that Hezbollah is part of anti-imperialism. I didn't agree with that. I disagreed with, and I think that there are some segments of the left that kind of bizarrely, like, oh, there was another time when this fundamentalist Muslim cleric wanted to speak at a university, but he demanded that he speak to a sex-segregated audience because he couldn't, speak to just men or just women. And, the university kind of accommodated that. And I don't think that's fair, because that's accommodating a prejudice of the speaker. You can't, that's not just. Like, we wouldn't do that for a fundamentalist who demands that all gay people be removed out of the audience. It kind of represents a condescending way at looking at Muslims, to think that they're not just as capable of bigotry and foolishness as a Christian fundamentalist.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you ever, since you used to watch Sargon of Akkad back in the day, I'm gonna go ahead and guess on that you also watched a little bit of Kraut and Tea.
Very little. He was never really a big thing of mine.
Yeah, okay. Well, he at least had some videos about Islam. He's like very much in opposition of Islam. And he made a rather eye-opening video for me, at least, where he didn't make it for me, but it was eye-opening for me, where he showed polls from every Islamic country in the world, how people think about gay people in these Islamic countries. And those are only, and then there are only Muslims that are polled, and it shows, like, I don't think it was a single country where less than 50% were against homosexuality. And in every single country on earth that has a death penalty for homosexuality, all of them are Muslim countries or Islamic countries. And to me, that's like, because I think people in the West have a tendency to forget that the Middle East and the East is very different from the West.
Yeah.
And so I think socialists, at least in Norway, I don't really know how socialists in Canada are, but a lot of socialists, not everyone, but a lot of them, seem to forget that when they talk about, like, the standard Muslim in the street, he's not necessarily too fundamentalistic in his views. That's usually in the West because they have already assimilated to sort of the Western values, whereas absolutely a majority in these Muslim countries are they have grown up with these horrible values. And whenever I talk to people about that, they usually go, yeah, but not everyone is in ISIS. And I'm like, yeah, but not every fundamentalist Muslim is a part of a guerrilla group.
Yeah.
So that's a sort of bad argument to me. And I like to see the best in people. I think that a lot, like now I'm gonna do the whole I'm not racist, but thingy, but or the whole I'm not racist. I know a black guy. Um, but I know, and I've met Muslims that are perfectly fine people.
Hmm.
But I'm also aware that they have either been born into the values of the West, or that they have already assimilated to those values when they came here. Um, so what's your sort of stance on that part?
Hmm.
Do you think that most Muslims, even in these countries, are not really that radical, or would you say that that's sort of a naive thought?
I'd be interested in looking at surveys of Christians and Buddhists in Southeast Asia and Africa and comparing them. Because Uganda almost quite famously almost passed a bill making homosexuality punishable by the death penalty. Now it's just like something like 40 years in prison. And this was in
Yeah.
a democratic country. Most of these Muslim countries that you're talking about don't actually have the option to vote on the policies that their governments implement, which might explain why they're more, regressive than the potentially the average person's views. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that a moderate or a non-fundamentalist Islam has been under a continuous assault by Saudi funding. The Saudis are extremely involved in trying to push their extremely fundamentalist version of Islam, Wahhabi Islam, onto everyone else through the funding of mosques. They've even set up a few in Albania. And it's all throughout the Middle East. They have these mosques preaching, the worst, most vile version of Islam, and yet they still receive billions of dollars in weapons sales from the West. So I think the best thing that we can do in terms of helping these countries is, accept gay Muslim refugees from these countries, up to a limit. I understand that not every country can continually accept refugees, but I definitely think my country could do more to take the pressure off of Europe to accept all the refugees and take in more. Um, I think that, support feminist and queer activists working in this region to, working to advance their rights, and stop arming these fundamentalist regimes.
Oh yeah, that's maybe the most important thing that the West can do is to, stop arming countries like Saudi Arabia.
Hmm.
Stop joining in on the genocides in, for example, Yemen, which
Yeah,
is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. It's way worse than Syria
yeah,
and stuff like that. And if we stop going to war in these countries, then guess what? We stop making refugees out of the people
hmm,
living there. So it's
yeah,
interesting because we have like one party that's actually in government here in Norway,
yeah,
and they're very, let's say, critical to taking refugees, to taking any people,
yeah,
really. And yet still they support every war that they can, and it's such a way to sort of take your hand while stabbing you in the back.
yeah.
And then they go out and talk about like, oh, the gas prices in Norway are way too high, and I'm like, yeah, well, you support the wars that make the gas prices higher. So
You know,
I,
you,
I don't understand why people don't realize that politicians are their their job is to lie to you in some
yeah,
sense, or at least to mislead you into voting for them.
hmm,
And I think that's why sort of Trump got so popular in the United States, because people realized that Hillary Clinton lied to them because they have known her for so long.
Hmm.
Whereas Trump is more of a he was all over the place. One day he could say that, oh, I won't send your jobs away and I'll protect you from the TPP, and the next day he would go and say that, oh, we will pull out of Iraq, and then the day after he would say that we have to take out the families of the terrorists. So
Yeah.
it was like he was a complete joker in that sense.
Hmm. He gave everyone what they wanted because he said what everyone wanted to everyone. And so if you were not necessarily paying attention to politics and looking for someone who is, not Hillary Clinton, who is not just the kind of the incarnation of the neoliberal establishment, um, if you tuned in to Trump and heard what you wanted to hear, you could convince yourself that he was your guy.
Yeah, and I think his aggressive attack on the TPP, for example, was very much the reason why the Rust Belt went for him. So I don't really have too much else. I can see that the voice of one is calling you out in the.
Yeah, the interpretation fallacy. I'm just looking that up. And asserting that the intended meaning of the author is the only or most important meaning. A fallacy involving an assessment of a literary work. Oh, um, this is a strange criticism because I never actually mentioned any literary work, and this seems to be a term that's solely for literary criticism.
Yeah, I think he wrote it a little while ago, so I'm not sure exactly. Okay, let's see. Interpretation of any religious text as they were written. Yeah, but then again, they were written almost 2,000 years ago, and we can't really know what they meant. Um, oh yeah, I actually wanted. Do you have a lot of time, or?
I do have time.
Okay, then I just came to think about some topics that I wanted to discuss with you,
Sure.
or at least that I wanted to ask you, because since you're a Canadian, what's your thoughts on Jordan Peterson?
Oh, I hate him. I hate him. I hate how he's the face of Canada.
Is he a better or worse face for Canada than Justin Bieber?
Uh, that's the $1 million question. Justin Bieber is, that's another thing. Like, why do we keep sending out our worst people as our faces?
Well,
I'm
if nothing else, you do have Ryan Reynolds, and he's a good one.
yes, he's an attractive
Um,
face.
no, so Jordan Peterson for me is a very mixed bag.
Mm,
To me, I think the shit he's saying, he is purposely very vague always, so that
yeah.
you can never really catch him, because then he will just
Mhm.
go, "Oh, I didn't say that. I just stated something that I've read, or stated opinion or
Yeah,
facts
the
or
context.
whatever." And his self-help stuff, as long as it helps people, it's fine.
Hmm.
I'm okay with that. And I think he has some valid criticisms of identity politics, for example.
Mm,
However, to me, he doesn't seem like he understands what postmodernism is.
no.
He has a very narrow idea of what it is, and it doesn't seem like he has read any postmodern philosophers, to be honest.
Yeah.
And to me, it just seems like he slaps the word postmodernist over anything that he sees as left.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm very unimpressed by his religious views. I think those are, whenever he's talking about God and religion and how people are religious, then those are always the dumbest shit he says. And it
Yeah.
always, like, he had one conversation where he was asked about, do you think that there are any artists that are godless? Or I think someone said that, oh, there are a lot of artists that are godless. And he goes, I think they think they are godless. And I'm like, that's so fucking condescending that, uh, yeah, I don't know what to do with that information. And
Yeah.
I think the things that he says that he has become popular from is really basic things that most people agree with.
Yeah. Clean your room.
Yeah. Oh, car.
Hmm.
Yeah, pet stray
The
cats.
one car
That's a
that
good
passes
idea.
every day in Norway.
Well, now, yeah, it's like 1 o'clock here now. So
I see.
no, so do you see any value to Jordan Peterson, even though you disagree with him a lot?
Um, well, I'm glad that he's getting people into philosophy. I'm glad that he's getting people to talk about Jung and all these different thinkers. I think that's important. I like that I like that he at least I've noticed that a lot of the right-wing talkers tend to be very anti-intellectual. Like people like what's a face? He's a big commentator on Fox News. Oh, he's
Sean
not on Fox
Hannity?
News anymore. Sean Hannity or people like Rush Limbaugh. Like they're very much like anti like information. They don't seem to
Yeah.
like facts. They don't seem to like thinking, and it seems to really irritate them when people, you know, when they don't seem to be able to articulate a, you know, a really like a nice sounding argument, an intellectual argument. Jordan Peterson is capable of doing this. He does it in a very rambly, kind of confusing way that sounds like it could be one thing and then maybe is another. And I think actually that's why he's so popular, is because people paste their own meaning over him and
Yeah.
give him his words a significance that they don't necessarily have.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I said, to me, he's not a very impressive person. I think that if you just give it some thought, then Jordan Peterson isn't really all that impressive. I am personally more a fan of people like Sam Harris,
Mm,
mostly because I think Sam Harris has a much better idea of religion and
mm,
how the Western values came to be, whereas Peterson mostly ascribes it to God and religion, and Sam Harris goes, well, we could have actually evolved to this point by ourselves.
mm,
Um, at some point, we stopped killing each other because we knew that it doesn't gain society to kill each other.
mm.
But that's a little bit of a. I'm imagining that you're not a big fan of Harris either.
Well, I don't like some of his foreign policy stuff, especially. I didn't like much of his conversation on you know, being pro the Iraq War. I didn't
Yeah.
like the. I think he said once. I don't know if I have it here somewhere, but I could probably find it again. The quote of his where he said, "The people who have the best ideas about Islam in Europe are actually the fascists." Like, I think that's an unhelpful way of looking at the subject.
Yeah, if
Um,
you could send that to me, I think I would need to actually look at
yeah,
that.
yeah, sure. I had it. I actually I'm on the Sam Harris Reddit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I've never been an apologist for Harris. I just think that he, in comparison with Peterson, he is a better example of how to
Yeah.
how to structure our society, in my
Well,
opinion.
yeah.
Um, out of the
He's
sort of
definitely way more intelligent.
out of the sort of what do you call it, the four horsemen of atheism, I've always been a sort of Dawkins fan more than any of the
Mm,
others.
yeah.
So I don't know. Did you listen to the podcast episodes that Sam Harris did with Jordan Peterson?
No, I actually haven't. Should I? Is it worth tuning into?
Okay, so the first one is quite interesting because they can't get past the point of what is truth, and they
Mm,
argue for 2 hours about what truth is, and it really shows how simple Jordan Peterson is from time to time. Whereas the second one, they get more into to a sort of bigger debate about religion and stuff like that. It's interesting if you're into that.
into the sort of kind of philosophical ideas about what truth is. I can
Yeah,
see why.
and religion.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as an atheist, but I definitely think that most atheists I talk to um, have a better idea of where society needs to go than a lot of the fundamentalists I talk to. And
Oh yeah. I was wondering about that. Do you have a lot of talks with fundamentalist people? Because I saw in the stream you did with the witch girl,
yeah.
that you said something that you have this policy of yours that you don't talk to alt-righters at all.
hmm I have had lots of talks with fundamentalist people. Unfortunately, the last fundamentalist I was talking to decided to start hating on me and just like obsessively um, posting paragraphs to everything I said everywhere, and it got too much for me. And
Uh,
yeah, he wouldn't respect my gender identity either, so I had to cut him loose.
I understand. Out of curiosity, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. So, what is your gender identity? Because you made that sound like you don't identify yourself as female.
Oh, I do identify myself as female.
Oh, okay.
I
Oh,
was a man when I was born. I transitioned to
oh, I wouldn't have known.
a woman.
That's interesting.
I'm glad. Hopefully, I haven't turned you away.
Let's jump over to something else. Uh, no, so why would you give fundamentalists the time of day, but not alt-righters?
Well, because the evils of fundamentalism, while they can be often pretty bad, like the dominionist type of fundamentalist can be quite noxious. Um, I think that you have people who genuinely believe in something good, where I find that the alt right don't. Like the fundamentalists, I think they think that they're a very moral people, and they're pushing for something that could conceivably be seen as good. In the alt right, I don't see that. I see hate. I see violence in every single word I see. I hear them speak. I hear deceit. I hear like this viciousness, this overwhelming desire to kill, which a lot of fundamentalists are, maybe they can be hateful, but they're normally peaceful, especially of the Christian variety. Though not always. There are exceptions to that.
Yeah, you have people like the Westboro.
Yes, and
Well,
like it would be hard to have a conversation with someone so rabid, but like it depends on the fundamentalists. Like normally, I have conversations with anyone who is willing to be respectful to me and willing to not just say that what I'm saying is wrong without providing a reason why.
yeah, see. So, I'm gonna guess you saw the Spencer Sargon debate when it
I did
happened.
indeed.
Um, what did you think of that?
I think that it was a huge win for the alt right. I think that
Yeah.
it could have like it was so bad. Like Sargon did so poorly in that debate that I think he could have convinced maybe thousands of his fans that the alt right had the right of it.
Yeah, I sort of the only person when I watched that, the only person I personally felt went out of that looking good was Dick Saxonhammer, and that was because he sort of was way more in the background than the other two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the problem was that Sargon was completely unable to hold his composition.
Yeah,
He became like it was so obvious that Spencer came under his skin.
yeah.
Um, and like you said, I think that was a win for the alt right. Even though I agree way more with Sargon, I think he
Mm-hmm.
did a poor job.
Yeah.
Um,
Like
and
even I was agreeing with Richard Spencer, and I'm so far left. Like, how can you get me to agree with Richard Spencer? Like, literally, no one else could have done that
yeah,
except a complete failure on the opposition.
yeah,
And
and I think that's because it was interesting to follow Sargon in the weeks that followed because suddenly he went off on the alt right all the time in every stream he was on his Facebook page all the time.
yeah,
And I thought it was obvious that to see that he now understands that the alt right is a dangerous enemy that we sort of have
yeah.
to. take seriously. But now he has sort of regressed back to talking only about the problems of the left, I feel.
Yeah.
So it saddens me that it wasn't it didn't do a longer impact on him.
Yeah, I think if I had ever done a debate so poor, I think I would have maybe reflected on, you know, egotism and narcissism that I saw in Sargon in that debate. I would have said, you know, how can I do better to prepare in the future? How can I do more to take like what if I, because I would never do this sort of debate, but if I had, like, I would take it extremely seriously, because if you lose, you are promoting a genocidal ideology.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I did think that Sargon got some interesting points in there, especially like when he asked Spencer if they were going to release um, the Native Americans back into the wild. I thought that was hilarious.
It's funny that Richard Spencer was like, that was racist, Sargon. Which,
Yeah,
like, how can you get Richard Spencer to be like, you know, not as racist
yeah,
as you are?
yeah. No, so I think that debate sort of echoed into where we are today, in the way that
Mhm.
people see Richard Spencer, people see Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah.
And Sargon was really dragged over the coals in the coming time for being a horrible debater. Even though I saw his debate at MythCon, I don't know if you saw that one, and
No.
no, I honestly thought he did a great job at debating. I can't remember his name. Um, and I've sort of had talks with people about this before, where I think I explained that I think Sargon has been so focused on the problems of the left that he doesn't understand the tools to fight the right with.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I've seen debates with him against feminists, and he's also come off looking pretty bad. Like the one he did with Christy Winters, I think she won.
I I didn't see that one.
Yeah. And it was actually quite a while ago, back when he was more like a Gamergate figure than like culture warrior on the side of Trump and Le Pen.
Yeah. So Gamergate. What's now we're going into old
Yeah.
topics. But so what's your view on Gamergate?
Gamergate is interesting because I think, like, it is simultaneously a subject that people have talked about endlessly, and yet is spectacularly uninteresting and menial.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I had a rather long conversation about Gamergate the other day with a guy here in Norway.
Hmm.
And it was interesting to me because I suddenly understood that my view on the whole Gamergate thing is not necessarily logical for everyone else. And I thought I was just so sound logical that
Hmm.
that I got a little bit surprised when I
Yeah.
learned that someone was able to have a different opinion than me
Hmm.
on that specific topic anyway.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
so let's see, we're a little bit over an hour, I think. Um, is it something else you would like to ask me or take up
mhm.
or talk about?
um, oh, well, I didn't think that we'd really talk much about Gamergate, so we could kind of explore that a bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
and
could.
I didn't mean to be dismissive. It's just that I find it interesting just how passionate people got on both sides of the topic. Um,
Yeah,
what I will say is that there was corruption in the gaming press, and I still think there is to a large degree, of the gaming
yeah,
press being too willing to just, you know, the company passes them a bucket of money and all this, or like more subtly, like takes them to this lovely place, gives them a wonderful play set, gives them tours of the facility, all this sort of thing to butter them up, and then they just give a nice review. And like, you look at is it ING,
I think so.
and they never seem to,
Yeah,
yeah, they never seem to give like give almost all their video games like 7 to 9 out of 10. Like,
yeah,
very rarely do you see a negative review coming out of IGN.
Yeah, I usually never trust IGN anyway because I feel that they are always rating my favorite games in a bad way, and they rate like the games that are good, they only get mediocre reviews, whereas games that are like, oh, this is gonna be so horrible, they always get like 9 and 10, and I'm like,
Well,
yeah, you know what, I'm just gonna play my games myself and decide for myself what I think.
yeah. Hmm.
Oh yeah, it's IGN. Thanks, Forty. We already figured it out. Um, yeah. So, but no, I wasn't really trying to get into a larger conversation about Gamergate. It's sort of ancient news at this point, and
Yeah.
it was just sort of a curiosity I had for a second where you sort of stood on that.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And
as a intersectional feminist, I would imagine that you would be on the side that we're, you know, don't sexualize our digital women.
well, when it comes to that, it depends on how it's framed and who's organizing it, right? Like when you
Okay.
have a male developer. Oh, sorry. The audio on the other end, I was hearing my own voice coming off from your
Oh
end.
yeah,
It's
yeah. It
unreal.
happened for a second. I think it's better now.
Yeah. So anyway, when it comes to a male developer designing this woman that like has this butt that's the size of like a giant beach balloon, walking down the street, and these breasts that are also this size, I look at that and I think, how could anyone possibly find that attractive? Like to me, that looks like some. I just kind of want to put that poor tortured creature out of its misery. Like it just looks so unattractive to me.
Yeah, well, I guess some people find it sexy.
Yeah, to each their own, I assume.
Yeah,
And it's not like I would be in any way for censoring that sort of thing. Like it's not the job of the state to determine that sort of thing, like to go around censoring all sorts of pornography and being the moral watchdog of everyone else. I think the job of the state is to ensure that everyone has a decent life and to ensure that everyone has the liberty to do with that life what they wish, as opposed to being the moral police. However, I will say that like there's some conversations that you can have. It wouldn't necessarily be very interesting to have these conversations with me. I think there's lots of sexism in the world, and video game sexism is often a very niche and uninteresting topic.
yeah,
And I thought that Anita Sarkeesian did a rather poor job of analyzing that sexism and did it in a kind of alienating and judgmental way.
yeah. In my opinion, Anita Sarkeesian is let's see if I can remember the official term, a lunatic. I I, I think she's mad, um, and I also think that she's an opportunist that saw this as something that she could earn money from or get fame from,
Yeah.
and I don't trust a single word that she says about it. There are other people that would be better suited for sort of champion that side,
Mm.
even though I am always going to be on the sort of artist side. The artists should be allowed to do whatever they want, as long
Yeah.
as it's
Mhm.
possible to do it.
There's a big line though between artists being allowed to do what they want and an artist making something rather bad and that being criticized. I'm not a censorship advocate, but I do also believe that you should be able to speak critically of materials. Whether those criticisms are any good, is another thing.
Yeah,
Like we've seen a lot of criticisms lately from the right of culture that I think are just mind-bogglingly terrible. Like the whole no bullshit video on Affinity Wars SJW moments, where he says that three women fighting the monsters is an SJW moment, and or
yeah,
that's
but I think I watched some of No Bullshit's videos, and I think I very quickly ended up just understanding that he is not really to be taken seriously, in my opinion.
No,
There
no.
are YouTubers and there are people on the right that I actually take seriously.
Yeah.
And that has some points that I make it a point to watch people on the right as well, just so that I keep myself from being in an echo chamber.
That's important. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
and that's why I try my best to also talk as much as possible with the people in the Red Eye stream, because I know that I have disagreements with them, but we are still, good friends, me and the people on there.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's a very important aspect of sort of keeping yourself in check, to
Yeah,
always try to listen and read what people on the other side are thinking, and try to see the world from their perspective sometimes.
yeah. I think
Um,
definitely, definitely.
yeah,
I,
and that is sort of why I wanted to talk to you as well, because I don't really affiliate with the more far left sort of.
yeah,
And I think it's interesting because I don't watch too many people that are further left than me. So I think
mhm,
it's interesting to actually have a conversation with someone that clearly identifies herself as a feminist and a socialist.
yeah. No,
So
I,
kudos
I
to
like.
you.
Mhm. I love talking to people with opposing views. It's so refreshing to hear other people's takes and opinions. Um, I do wish that sometimes people get a bit less heated at me. Like sometimes that happens. Like not like your friend was very nice, and a lot of the right wingers I talk to on this site are also very calm. But I've talked to a few that they don't seem to be able to control themselves, and they get very angry at me, and they just seem to like they're reciting talking points from the comments section of the Daily Mail.
Yeah, yeah, and also, I try my best to always keep collected. I actually, right after you left the stream the other day,
Yeah.
I ended up rage quitting because Mad Dodge really got under my skin, and then I came back and we made up.
Okay.
Uh,
Good to hear.
but yeah, but so I think it's important, like I said, to talk to people from all sides of the spectrum, which is why I wouldn't agree with you not talking to people on the alt right at all, but I understand why.
Yeah.
Um, if you only feel that they are degrading you in conversations, and you only feel that they are bringing hate and nothing constructive at all, then yeah, I
Hmm.
don't see the reason why one should put oneself
Yeah.
through a conversation with people that. It's like, I don't know if you saw the clip of Bernie Sanders in the airport, in the LAX airport,
Oh,
where
Alex Jones.
yeah,
He's under no obligation to talk to that guy.
yeah, and people are like, oh, why didn't he talk to him? And I'm like, well, he's only like he's not going to take anything Bernie Sanders says seriously. He's only going to talk shit to him and talk shit about his ideology. He's not going to try to listen to what Bernie Sanders has to say to him, and he's not going to give well thought out responses. So why would Bernie Sanders spend any time talking to him? But the interesting part was that he didn't actually seem uninterested in talking to him at first. It was his sort of, I don't know, bodyguard or advisor or whatever that stepped in and basically told him to, hey, you don't spend time on this idiot.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if Bernie Sanders right off the bat recognized Alex Jones.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have known. I am. I don't know how much Infowars Bernie Sanders watches. So,
Yeah, I think he has better things to do with his time. I think I have better things to do with my time. Like
yeah.
what I watch of Infowars is mostly sometimes clips from Kyle Kalinske and sometimes things of theirs that have been made into a meme, because
Oh yeah.
pretty much every
Oh.
episode is quality gold mine material.
Oh yeah. Have you seen the Alex Jones indie song?
I think I may have. I think it was from this one YouTuber. Not
Yeah,
sure.
it's hilarious, and me and my roommate, we for a period of time we were basically singing the song every day to each other. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah, it's by the Super Deluxe channel here. Oh
yeah,
yeah, definitely. I have indeed
it's such
watched
a
it.
great song. 40 says that people watch for the memes, and I think that um, most people that are, and now I'm gonna sound like an asshole to everyone that doesn't come into the group that I'm talking about, but
Mm.
I think most people that are at a high enough cognitive level um, will only watch it for the memes.
Yeah,
But we gotta remember he has millions of viewers.
yeah.
Not every single one of them watches Infowars for the memes.
Hmm. Which
Um,
is pretty scary because he says a lot of wacky stuff, which is obviously nonsense. But
yeah.
I knew a guy who watched him unironically,
Uh,
who
uh,
believed that climate
I,
change is a
that
hoax.
I just it sounds like such a sad reality to live in, where you take Infowars seriously. Is-
Definitely, because you'd have to believe like 9/11 inside job, like Sandy Hook was an inside job. Um, what was it?
oh,
Climate
Sandy Hook
change.
wasn't an inside job. Sandy Hook was a hoax. It never happened.
Yeah, no, didn't exist. It was staged.
Yeah,
Psyops actors. Um,
and now recently he in the Bernie Sanders video he said that Hillary edited the videos of it. So it's even Hillary Clinton's fault.
what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's but okay. So talking about Alex Jones, because in his trial with his ex-wife,
Hmm.
he said that Alex Jones on Infowars is just a character. Do you believe that, or do you think that was only a way to defend himself?
A ploy? Um, I think to a certain extent that he could be a character. Like there is
Yeah,
something very performative about the certain madness of Alex Jones.
yeah. I'm so on the fence on it because, like you said, there's something with it where when I go, I can't really believe everything he says, or that he believes everything he says. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, there's nothing he does or says that really contradicts that he would believe it. Um,
Mhm.
I love. I also love all the memes that have been made about Paul Joseph Watson on Infowars when,
Oh
like,
yeah, remember when he was like he seemed so unconvinced that the Dallas shooting was Antifa Islamist.
and I'm gonna delete this message right now. No cameras, please. Oh, it was so great. No, and people are editing it like all over the place, and I think it was maybe Peter Norway on
Oh, I love
Twitter.
him. I
Yeah,
love him.
I think he might have posted a video of Infowars
Uh,
where they are talking about global warming,
yeah.
and Alex Jones goes, "Yeah, and they are trying to heat up the planet from inside," and then it just zooms in on Paul Joseph Watson's face, and it goes into black and white, and
Yeah.
the sound of silence starts playing.
Oh yeah. I have it right here. It's his pinned tweet.
Oh, I fucking love that one.
Oh, it's amazing. He is
Oh,
such a gift to the world.
yeah. So what do you think about Paul Joseph Watson?
Um, I think he's a con man. I think he sells really bad ideas to basically his preteen audience.
Yeah. Uh, uh, Paul Joseph Watson is a guy that strikes me like I have more respect for him than I have for people like Alex Jones. But then again, that doesn't say much. Uh, I think he might have believed a lot of what he said before, and that at this
Mm.
point he sort of knows that he Yeah, that was my mother. Yeah, I'm visiting my parents.
I see.
Yeah. No, so at this point, he, who am I talking about? Paul Joseph Watson. At this point, he knows that he has to sort of go one step further.
Yeah.
With in order to impress his audience.
Yeah.
And Fordy says that Paul Joseph Watson's videos are generic 5-minute clips, and yeah, they are.
And it's just like, it's such obvious nonsense that if you take a bit of time to research it and take a bit of time to look at what he's saying, it completely falls apart like a house of cards. Like, remember that video where he was like, depression isn't real?
Yeah.
Like, you just need to take a walk.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know about the sort of spoken word guy that what's this called, Prince E, I think. And he did a sort of thing about depression, and that depression, you're not depressed, you're just experiencing depression, and like clouds on the sky, depression comes and it goes, and it comes and then it stays for a while. And the sort of YouTube rapper Boy in a Band sort of did a takedown of him because of that. It was amazing. I can send it to you.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and also I also have a great takedown of Paul Joseph Watson and modern culture in my playlist.
What was his name? Like, I can't even remember the guy's name, but I saw that one as well, because I thought that video was really, like,
Yeah,
it's so
it's
stupid.
the needle drop. It's Anthony Fantano.
Like, he thinks, like, this is a guy who's claiming to be the new face of counterculture, and yet here he is whining about culture, basically.
Yeah.
Everything's wrong, I'm right, and so are like I don't know. It's weird how he manages to sell the ideas of like 70-year-old grandparents to 12-year-olds.
Yeah, but that's the same with Ben Shapiro. Whereas Ben Shapiro has learned the art of talking fast enough so that people don't register why he's an idiot. Ben Shapiro I also have a little bit more respect for, because he seems to genuinely believe his ideas more than just trying to sell snake oil to people.
I think Ben Shapiro is legitimately a conservative. I think
Yeah.
he wholeheartedly believes in his ideals. Another thing that is a good sign to me is that he's against Trump, but he's still a conservative.
Yeah. Oh, and he also had this feud with Alex Jones, whereas Alex Jones went off on him on Infowars. I love when two people on the sort of far right start to devour each other. It always makes my day.
Similar thing happened to like Lauren Southern and all the alt-right women. And like all the alt-right men suddenly realize the contradiction of having a bunch of women demand that all women go back to the kitchen, and then still making videos and a living and not having kids and being in the kitchen.
So I watched a video today that I thought was interesting. I don't know if you have seen anything from Shoe on Head.
I have seen some of her stuff. I have, of all the anti-SJWs, I have the most respect for her.
Yeah, I think she got married today, actually.
Oh,
with Armored Skeptic.
Oh, good for her. I hope they have long and happy relationship and overcome some of the wonkier opinions.
Yeah, no. So she made a video today that or maybe she made it the other day. I can't remember, but I saw a video of hers today that I thought was interesting about some parts from second wave feminism. That's called political lesbianism. Yeah, where they basically talk about how being heterosexual is a choice, and they basically regress into the talking points of conservative Christians. What's your take on the political lesbians?
dreadful idea, pointlessly alienating straight women from feminism. Separatism is not the answer. I'm completely against separatism in general, in terms of for myself, and I think that it's bad for the world. I think that it's like, even as a short-term solution, you're still cutting yourself off from so many people. And like, there are people who are like trans and like, oh, I can only relate to trans people. All cis people can only be allies and never my friends. I'm like, no, that's not how I see the world. So much of the people in my life are cis, and I don't mind. They don't bother me. The only problem I have with is bigotry and power, not necessarily any identity. And if another identity gains power enough to enforce bigotry upon other people, then that also becomes a problem for me. Like,
Yeah.
like the like in the West, we might say that the group in power is white people. In China, we might say it's the Han Chinese, that particular ethnicity. In Japan, we would say it's the Japanese. And each identity isn't, immune from using power to enforce bigotry upon other people.
Okay.
It's not uniquely a providence of white people. It's a providence of geographical and demographical condition.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, so I thought I could maybe explain why
Okay.
I don't look at myself as a feminist anymore. I did use that word about myself, but I sort of started feeling that feminism, like the feminist movement, not feminism as ideals, but the feminist movement, started feeling very controlling to me. And they started to feel very obsessed with identity politics, and they started feeling very much like they wanted to have a monopoly on fighting for equality and equal
Okay.
rights. And I think that's one of the things that I told you on the last time we spoke, that I don't consider myself a feminist, a little bit because I don't think feminism has a monopoly on fighting for equal rights. Um, but I do meet feminists that are going the whole line of, "Are you fighting for equal rights?" And I go, "Yes," and then they go, "Well, then you're a feminist." And I don't like when people ascribe ideologies to me from an outside perspective.
You like to embrace it for yourself.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think that there has become sort of a focus that men, sorry, men and women are different, and we have these different views on society, and men can't really understand the problems that women have had to endure up to this point. And I'm happy that we can't, in the way that that means that we have never really suffered in that way. Um, but I think it's a problem to sort of talk about how I feel that a lot of feminists are painting even the West with very black paint, and saying that, oh, we have so many problems that are completely unsolvable, and or at least that aren't solvable in the way that we are structuring our societies. And then sometimes they can't really give anything else than really um, just everyday examples that aren't really affecting them. Whereas other times they are not necessarily talking about the problems, but they're talking about a solution that I don't think would work.
Okay.
And my example there would be for what's it called in English? Okay, so when two people apply for a job,
Yeah.
and
Affirmative
then
action.
yes, that's the one I talk about. I believe that affirmative action was necessary at some point, but I don't think it is in the West at this point.
That's an interesting view. What I will say is that affirmative action seems to work better when it's branded around class. I've noticed that, you know, especially like I looked at racial affirmative action in South Africa and America, which are the only two countries that actually practice it as like pretty efficiently. And it seemed to be that, yes, there were some positive benefits, like lots of Black people were able to enter into the workforce, which is a very good thing. However, the problem is that, especially for institutions of higher learning, you would have someone, you know, be led into a university and then drop out because the course load was too heavy for them, and they had been, you know, the subject was too hard, even though that the criteria for letting them in had been lowered. You know, the subject itself was just too hard for someone with that lowered ability. So when it comes to that, I think the problem there is that there is an intersection, especially observable in the United States, between race and class. And the way that I would fix it is have education be free, you know, all the way from tertiary to secondary to public and to primary. All of that should be state provided. I think that education really shouldn't be necessarily a commodity unless you want to hire like a private tutor or something.
Yeah, personally, when it comes to hiring and stuff like that, I think the best way to do it is to have a completely anonymous hiring process, and then you end up and then you end up having a meritocracy. And I think meritocracy is something that we should strive for. It should be the best person for the job, whether it be a man, woman, black, white, Asian, whatever. As long as you are like, and that's why I don't like affirmative action in the way that some of the Western countries have it. And even here in Norway, I ran for office actually 2 years ago, and no, it's closer to 4 years. 3 years ago, I think it was.
As like a political.
Yeah.
Okay.
And every party had a sort of list where you have the person running for mayor and then the people below. And there we had this rule that if the person running for mayor was a man, then the person below him had to be a woman, and the other way around. And I think that poses the problem that, okay, but what if all the women that we have for the list are horrible politicians or completely unlikable, and that ends up getting all the strikes from the balance? We can strike people as well. And so that's why I'm like, well, let's just go in a meritocratic route instead, and just say this person has worked most for the party, and this person has been more active and been more public. But that's sort of, they have this paragraph, so they're not actually allowed to. And I think that poses a problem, because the person ending up in the second spot was she was a young, rather uncharismatic person, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I was pushed very far down the list. And a couple of years later, I left the party because I thought they were becoming somewhat neoliberal and very unpopulistic. They didn't want to listen to the people at all.
This was the Labour Party of Sweden?
Yeah.
Hopefully you can get some sort of Jeremy Corbyn-esque figure to reinvigorate the Labour Party of Sweden. Because right now I do see, you're right, and that's why the Labour Party of Sweden lost a lot in the last election, while more radical parties like the Communist Party of Sweden and the Socialist Party in Sweden did better.
I think you're mixing up Sweden and Norway.
Oh, sorry. Did I say Sweden? I meant Norway.
Yeah, and that was actually quite interesting, because the party I ended up voting for in our last election was a centrist party, and they're sort of center left. the only party on the left that did bad was the Labour Party. Everyone else, like every party on the right went back, and every party on the left, except for the Labour Party, went forward.
Mm.
Which to me, and then our prime minister managed to come out the day after and say that this shows us that the Norwegian people want our policies. And I'm like, if anything, you should be fucking pissing your pants at this point because it shows that you are unpopular. You were just lucky enough that the guy running for prime minister from the Labour Party was more unpopular than you. Yeah, we actually do have one person that has been a very popular politician in Norway, but he left Norwegian politics in order to be the general secretary of NATO. And he's done with that in 2020, and there are some rumors that he might return to lead the Labour Party when he's done. And I generally don't like when politicians leave politics and then they come back, but I think it would be good for the Labour Party to go back to him as a leader because he's in modern times he is the most popular politician in Norway, I think.
Yeah, and
yeah. Oh, and he was deemed the most sexy state leader in the world when he was our prime minister.
Well, always a plus. Yeah, I mean, he didn't really leave politics because he's general secretary.
Yeah, no, but he left Norwegian politics.
Yeah, I see.
And I always think it's goofy when people leave Norwegian politics and then they come back and try to do a comeback in the more national politics. I usually think that's a bad sign, but on the other hand, this guy, he has been active for the last couple of years in a very important, very high position. So
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. No. Sorry.
You seem like you had a question.
I had a thought and then it evaporated, and now I'm trying to like pierce it back together. I always hate when that happens.
Do you have any idea what it was about?
What did the Labour Party shift towards that was more like unattractive? Like
okay, so we have, it's a little bit hard to explain it because we don't really have the same geographical buildup as other countries do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use the words region, and I'm going to mention what the words are in Norwegian as well.
Okay.
So we have these small regions that are called kommune.
Okay.
And our government has decided that we need a reform because we have too many of those. So they want to sort of merge a bunch of them together in order to get less of these regions, in order to sort of get a more effective society. Now, the party I voted for went very heavily out and said, we do not have a mandate to sit in Oslo and decide that the people in Bergen, for example, have to do this. We are not elected in order to decide this. So this should be something that if the different regions want to merge, they should have a vote on that amongst themselves, and then they can do it. Whereas the government goes, no, we will decide it. And what happened was that the Labour Party out here in this specific region, along with a bunch of other parties, the party officials went for like a weekend trip to Denmark, and then they came back, and then they suddenly had this big chunk of paper with them, and they were like, yeah, this is the plan for our new region. And then people were like, well, are you going to vote on that? Because are we going to vote on that? Because you guys are talking as if this is going to happen.
Mm.
And then they were like, yeah, you guys are not allowed to vote on that because reasons. The sun is in our eyes, I guess.
Yeah.
They were talking as if they didn't want people to be allowed to vote for it because in other places there had been such a low turnout that they didn't want a low turnout. So what they were going to do was the first thing they were going to do was to travel around to all these three original regions, and then they were going to do a fair and balanced presentation of what they had made or what the plans were. And the fair and I went to two of these meetings, and the fair and balanced way they presented it was basically as if it was already decided, and they
Mm.
had this guy come sing a song to the new region, and it was very propagandistic, and yeah, it was quite horrible. And all the mayors sat there and they were like, "Yeah, we are so proud of this new region that we're going to create a new region. We're not going to merge three regions."
Mm.
And yet still they wanted to go with the sort of region center of one of the regions, which is fine. It's a logical place to have it. And
Yeah.
then they wanted to use. We have these like shields of every region in Norway. So they wanted to use the region of one of the shield of one of the regions and the name of one of the others. And I'm like, well, that goes a little bit against making a new region. Then you're getting back to merging three.
Mm.
Um, and then they did the whole tour where they explained that, oh, we can't have a election on it, or a referendum. So, but what they were going to do, they promised the people that what we're going to do is that we are going to do a polling
Mm.
that won't be binding, but it will be used as extra information for the politicians because the politicians had to vote for it, vote for or against it. And so they did polling in all the three regions,
Yeah.
whereas the two largest regions voted for, or in the polls were, I think it was like one of them was very much for, and the other one was marginally for. And then the third, and the smallest region, the people were against it, quite convincingly, I think it was.
Mm.
And then came the day that they were going to vote for it, and the politicians in the two that had voted for went, yeah, of course, our people want this, so we vote for it.
Yeah.
Um, and the politicians in the one that voted no went, well, there wasn't enough people voting no, so we're going to vote yes. Uh, and then
Yeah.
they were going to sort of um, make a new name for the new region. And like I said, they had already presented this as if the new name was going to be the name of one of like the smallest region. And whenever people went, well, that's not really, we don't want it to be called that. They went, well, nobody gave us another option. And then we were like, well, we wrote in like 50 new options just this moment. And
Mm.
and they did online pollings from the newspapers, and it turned out like it was one name that was immensely popular in all the places. Like everyone from the other regions surrounding the new region wanted it to be called this, and everyone from the two biggest original regions wanted this same name. The only place that actually wanted the new name was the people from the region that already had that name. And then came the day that they were going to vote for it, and wouldn't you know it, that ended up being the new name as well.
Mm.
So the politicians, every step of the way, refused to listen to the people.
Yeah.
And at that point, and with the Labour Party almost leading the strike against people. And at that point, I couldn't really go on within
Yeah.
the party. I felt that um, they don't respect the fact that they are voted in.
Yeah. They had contempt for the people.
Yeah. And at this point, I am more often than not finding myself talking about how the Labour Party in Norway is a bad party,
Mm.
and they're quite neoliberal in the way they do things. I have more respect for the Communist and Socialist Party and parties in Norway than I have for the Labour Party at this point.
Yeah.
So how about American? No, Canadian politics. You guys have your Justin Trudeau.
Yeah. Well, he's somewhat of a neoliberal. I liked that he passed the bill protecting, making it stopping trans people from being discriminated against. That was a good thing he did. I liked that he is legalizing marijuana. That was a good thing he did. I didn't like that he didn't reform the electoral system like he'd promised he'd do. We were supposed to get proportional representation, but that never materialized. And he just kind of backed away from that promise because his party had done so well in the old system.
Yeah.
I didn't really like his nationalizing of the pipeline because I think we need to start moving away from oil, especially in Canada, because in Norway, the way you get oil is a bit better. In Canada, the way you do it, you have to kind of blast it out of the sands and it contaminates all the rivers in the surrounding region.
Is that fracking, basically?
Yeah, in many places.
Yeah.
Or it's just a dreadfully terrible method, and it wastes tons and tons of clean water that our country has.
Yeah.
And and it's even worse because you have to transport the oil over miles and miles and miles through these huge pipelines, and they always spill, and they always leave this massive wreck in the communities they do spill on. So that's why I'm like, we need to kind of move away from our oil addiction in Canada. Like the oil lobby just has way too much influence in Canada in general and Alberta in particular.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when people are talking about oil, especially in Norway, because we have the Green Party of Norway wants this ludicrous idea. They want to basically have shut down all of our platforms within 2020, I think, or 2025. And I'm like, you guys are fucking idiots if you think that's going to happen. And where the fuck are people going to work?
Yeah.
And they only provide, well, we're going to have new green jobs, but they never mention what those new green jobs are.
Yeah.
Because they don't really know. And we have a lot of environmentalists in Norway, which I admire what they want or the ideals of what they're fighting for.
Yeah.
But they don't understand that if Norway shuts down the oil, we have the cleanest oil in the world. And if we shut down our market, then we open up the market for places like China or Qatar to fill in that vacuum and then pollute the world even more. So while I agree that we have to move more and more away from oil, it would be it would almost be worse if Norway were to shut down the oil production tomorrow.
Mm. Yeah, well, that's the difference between Norway and Canada, because Canada has probably the most environmentally unfriendly oil production in the world. Like, you can't get worse than the way Canada gets its oil and the way it transports its oil. Like, we have really bad environmental protections in Canada. And I'm not necessarily for like shutting down across the board, like say in Newfoundland, or some of the gas that's going on in British Columbia. I think that we need to have lots of investment in green energy, but a rapid like ending all of it at one time is a bit of a bad idea. At the same time, climate change is a very serious problem, and I worry that a lot of people don't seem to recognize just how bad it is.
Yeah.
Like, especially right.
Let's see. 40 said you guys can set up solar panels to harness all that sun you get. I'm going to guess that he was talking to me because all the sun we get here in Norway. So yeah, thanks for that, 40. Um, at least 40,000 people don't die in Norway because we don't have health care. So yeah, no, environmentalism is important, and at some point we have to get rid of the oil. But that's the thing. We need to sort of phase it out in such a way that it won't shock the economy too much, because that would be really bad.
Yeah. Canada's economy is much more diverse in terms of not necessarily relying on the oil too much, except that one province, Alberta. And they like to throw their weight around if people don't agree with them. Like in British Columbia, they refused to let the pipeline go through their province. And now they like are raising the prices of oil in British Columbia, doing all these sorts of tariffs and things to try to force them to open the market for them.
Yeah. Oh, I think they might have noticed my little jab at the United States there. Well, oh well. No, and I also think that people are talking about the oil as if we're going to run out within the next 5 years, and the world still has a lot of oil, and we still have a lot of rare earth and shit. But it's just we can't. I don't think it's an intelligent position to say that. Well, let's just produce until we run out. I think it's then better to say that. Okay, let's try to slow it down.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can drop the whole oil thing before we run out and before we destroy our planet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then in case our planet gets better and we suddenly need the oil, then we will have it.
Yeah, I don't imagine that such a situation would emerge, but if it did,
yeah,
something that maybe need more urgent phasing out is things like coal.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I do think coal is completely outlawed in Norway. I'm not sure, but I think so.
Yeah, in Canada we still have coal, but it's been going down for years, mostly because coal as an energy source has been going down.
But when talking about coal, the forgotten man will not be forgotten again, or whatever it is Trump said.
Yeah. That whole nonsense about bringing the coal jobs back, that's not going to happen. What actually needs to be done is a serious investment in those areas for these green green energy. We need to think of new ways, like nuclear plants. Something needs to be done for these people that can be done to replace the coal jobs. It can't just be we ban the coal. All right, that's great. Now all these people that used to work in the coal industry are out of work. Well, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, I'm actually like, in Norway we have this one nuclear material called thorium.
Yeah.
And we have the biggest reserve of thorium in the whole world. And the thing about thorium, as opposed to uranium, is that thorium actually it can't have a meltdown. Like it can't. It's impossible to create a Chernobyl disaster with thorium. And I'm like, well, we're idiots then for not actually at least exploring it. At least, why are we not doing any research about it?
Yeah.
It could power Norway into the next millennium for all I know. And I don't know. Our governments are very much unwilling to go into that whole thing. I think they hear nuclear power and they associate uranium with it the second they hear it, and it's quite sad, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, the thing with like nuclear power is the main way we get power in my province of Ontario. But so there isn't really that fear. Although I wish more would be done to renovate these factories because they are still uranium based. They still do have the meltdown potential. I mean, it's not a very thing that happens very often. And in general, I'm pro nuclear energy, but there are certain locations where it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea very close to the sea especially in areas that are very stormy, and it's a bad
Yeah.
idea on areas that are on fault lines.
Yeah. So having it close to the sea, that would make a Japan sort of issue out of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of my talking. I'm talking about Japan and why the people of Japan are right to be against nuclear power. Like they are overwhelmingly against it for obvious reasons. Like they have had a traumatic past of being, nuked twice, and then they had in 2011 that near meltdown, and after the tsunami.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I saw that they tried to send robots into that thing, and even they broke down because of the radiation. So nuclear power can be pretty dangerous if done wrongly or if done with the wrong materials.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the lovely thing, like I said about thorium. You don't have that risk because it's not potent enough.
Yeah.
God, I had a question about that whole thing. I can't remember. It was something about your nuclear power thingy.
Ontario?
No. Well, if it's important, then I will remember it. Oh, Fukushima. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if it's important, I'll remember it. If not, then it wasn't important.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have been going for 2 hours.
Another car? Norway, you're really surprising me with how populous you are.
And I'm not even in the city. I'm quite far out into the rural woods. So that's interesting. I don't know why so many people are driving here in this neighborhood right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think maybe we can sort of wrap it up.
No, that sounds great. I had lots of fun with this conversation. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it was absolutely great. Do you have some final words, statements? Do you want to plug something?
No, I think I've said all I wanted to say. I'm happy with what I've said here today, and thank you very much for having me on.
Definitely. So people, check out the Effeminate Degenerate. I think her channel is a good one. Mostly streams, so you need some time out of your day to see the videos. But she absolutely has interesting points of views on things, even though I don't always agree. I don't know if you end up mirroring it, but if you do, then check me out as well, people.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of fun.
I will mirror this video.
Yeah,
get some more
cool.
traffic to your channel.
Yeah, I need it. You have actually, since I stumbled across your channel, you had fewer subscribers than me, but you have surpassed me. I've been stuck at 89 for a while now. It's fucking horrible.
Yeah, I had a moment there in May where I was stuck at 54, and every week I would gain a subscriber, and then 2 days later I would lose it. I'm like, ugh.
Oh, and also, just to look at our statistics before we're leaving, we have 2 likes and 1 dislike on this stream. So out of the 5 people that have been watching us, 1 of them couldn't stomach us. So yeah. With that, I say thank you to everyone in the chat. You guys have been autistic as usual. Thank you to the Effeminate Degenerate, and I'll see you guys later.